Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can everybody hear me? We're good? What a good-looking crowd this morning. Thank you all for getting up a little earlier than maybe you're used to. I know it's earlier than I'm used to. Welcome to the 21st Annual Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. This morning, I'm Renee Tessman. I'm a proud Anoka resident. In fact, I think I only live about a half mile from here. And I'm also a reporter at KARE 11 Television, and I've been there for 18 years. So I'm very proud to be able to MC this event this morning. I see a lot of familiar faces, and it's nice to see you all. And it's wonderful that we're here for such an important cause this morning. Let's talk about them. Youth First, Community of Promise. It's been serving our youth in the community for over 20 years now, and their mission is to actively engage youth, their families, and the community to ensure that youth have the 5 fundamental promises that they need to succeed: caring adults, safe places, a healthy start, effective education, and opportunities to help others. They accomplish this mission by providing free after-school and summer programs to at-risk and underserved youth in Anoka, Andover, and Ramsey. Youth First is truly a lifeline for these youth, and many of them face challenges on a daily basis that you and I could never imagine. They're surviving in a constant cycle of poverty. Many live in violent homes and have daily exposure to drugs and alcohol. Yet we expect them to go to school every day, perform well in class, and make smart choices with their time during our school hours and during out-of-school hours. That pressure is too much for many kids, and it shouldn't surprise us when they make poor choices and drop out of school. This is why Youth First is such a vital program here in this community. The dedicated staff at Youth First provide a safe place for them to go after school and during the summer. They don't have to go hungry because Youth First provides snack every day. They help with homework, provide access to technology so they can be successful in school, and most importantly, they provide an environment free from judgment and full of encouragement. The youth can leave their problems at the door and know that staff truly cares for them and wants nothing more than to see them succeed. In addition to the dedicated staff, Youth First has a devoted board comprised of representatives from each of their partners, and I'd like to take a moment now to introduce these individuals. Board members, if you could please rise when I mention your name and remain standing for just a moment. Let's start with the Anoka County directors. Gail Alexander. Okay, Laura Landis. Matt Look. Martha Weaver. Carol Ledoux. Okay, now City of Andover directors. Jim Dickinson. Good morning. Jill Disher. Good morning. Jim Goodrich. There he is. City of Anoka directors. Carl Anderson. Everybody wave to Carl. William Earhart. Good morning. Diane Henning. And there she is. And Jeff Weaver. All right. And then City of Ramsey directors. Michelle Anderson, the chair. There's Michelle. Chandra Cryer, secretary. Jim Steffen, treasurer. Melody Sharayak and Sarah Stroman. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here this morning. Ooh, it's a little wobbly up here, just so you know, so hopefully I won't go tumbling. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here again this morning. We really appreciate it and your support of Youth First. We hope that today's program will invigorate your commitment to youth in our community and the efforts of this valuable organization that we're here for this morning. Now I would like to welcome to the stage the mayors of our 3 partner cities to read and sign a proclamation of support for Youth First. Representing the City of Anoka on behalf of Mayor Rice is Councilmember Carl Anderson. Good morning. Joining us from the City of Ramsey is Mayor Sarah Stroman, and from the City of Andover, Mayor Julie Trude.
Well, welcome to everybody this morning. Everybody is so smiley. I think it's the weather. And when I got here early this morning, the man that walked around with the biggest smile on his face, and if you should see him here, is Larry Norland. That's our golf course management manager. He's responsible for this building, and we can thank him too for this event that we're having here. But anyway, he's smiling because tomorrow the golf course opens. So we have a proclamation to read here, and I guess it's my job to read it this morning. So, proclamation, Youth First Community of Promise Mayor's Prayer Breakfast, Friday, March 13th. Whereas the cities of Andover, Anoka, and Ramsey, together with Anoka County and Anoka-Hennepin School District number 11, joined together in 1995 to form the Northwest Anoka County Community Consortium. There's 3 C's there. Designed to create a public-private community partnership to focus on better delivery of existing public services to children and young adults. And whereas the consortium follows the national framework known as America's Promise, which promotes the 5 essential ingredients youth need to be successful in life: safe places, caring adults, effective education, a healthy start, and opportunities to serve, also known as the 5 Promises. And whereas the consortium oversees the initiative known as the Youth First Community of Promise, which is responsible for mobilizing individuals and collaboratives to support experiences that ensure that the 5 promises for young people in the greater community of Andover, Anoka, and Ramsey. And whereas the annual Mayor's Prayer Breakfast serves to solidify our community's resolve in providing these 5 promises for our youth. And now, therefore, be it proclaimed that Friday, March 13th, 2015 be declared Youth First Community of Promise Day in the cities of Andover, Anoka, and Ramsey. And the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast will be held on that day in support of the Youth First initiative. We call upon the citizens in our communities to assist the work of the Northwest Anoka County Community Consortium and our Youth First Community of Promise to implement a unified vision for youth development in our community. Thank you very much. And who got a pen? Julie, I bet you have a pen. Somebody, here comes one. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, I'll just start right out here. If you would, please. And Julie, good to see you. Thank you. I guess we're through.
I'd just like to say one
Oh,
thing.
please do.
Well, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say that Ramsey is so proud to be a supporter of Youth First, and I just personally wanted to thank all of the members of the board, all of the staff, all of the volunteers and folks who support Youth First. It's such an important organization. Our youth collectively, they're a group that deserve every advantage, and unfortunately some of them in our communities have every disadvantage, and I just appreciate the work that Youth First does to reverse that. And in particular, I just want to thank Councilmember Melody Shryak. She was unable to be here today, but she's our council's representative on the board, and also Councilmember Jill Johns, who had that position before her. The council is just happy to be that involved. So thank you very much for being here this morning.
Good morning, thank you. And I also wanted to just recognize a couple of board members that I've seen in my probably over a decade of attending these breakfasts, and they've just been there year after year after year. We've had Jeff Weaver fundraising every event I've gone to. This year we had to cancel the Mayor's Trail Ride, so I didn't get to enjoy doing something that Mayor Gamache got to do. But so everybody has to dig a little deeper tonight or this morning to make up for that. But he's been really involved. And Martha Weaver, I just want to thank you for telling the story of these kids with your videos. They just tug at our heartstrings, and I'm sure we're going to see another one today. And that's what really helped motivate me to pull out the checkbook a few years back, and I hope all of you will feel motivated to contribute as our family does to a group that helps take care of kids that are really difficult for a lot of us to work with. And so I guess special kudos to Heidi Geist, who greets all those kids warmly and with a smile and has the talent and ability to help them graduate and become successful contributing adults. And that's what this group's all about. And I just want to add that when I've explained what this is about to other people who don't know anything about it, they go, "You're kidding, you've got businesses, churches, and schools working together?" It just doesn't happen in any other type of organization. And so for a successful group like this to go on year after year and to grow and support, it does show that we can create those successful partnerships that benefit things that we all value. And we all value youth because they're going to be the leaders of tomorrow, and we need to be thinking about supporting them. And I know there are a lot of educators here, law enforcement as well, and your support to this organization means a lot as well. So thank you, everyone. And thank you to the board members who represent my city. Jim Dickinson's taken a lot of time away from his city managerial roles to help with the financial side of this organization. Thank you also to Jill Disher, who's been on the board for, I think, over 10 years now. And we welcome our new council member, Jim Goodrich, to add our third person to the board, which is really helpful for us. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson, Mayor Strauman, and Mayor Trude. We appreciate your comments this morning. Next, I would like to invite Pastor Rick Kraske from Anoka Covenant Church up here to lead our invocation.
Would you bow your heads together with me in prayer? Father, through your prophet Ezekiel, you called him as a watchman, but you also called him to stand in the gap. And there were others in the community that were called also to stand in the gap. And they were to be the ones who called out a warning, who tried to hold the community together in what it should be. And for them, the call was to speak a word. The call to us is to also stand in the gap, but with more than words. We stand in the gap with resources. We stand in the gap with our presence, with our commitment. We stand in the gap for the saving of lives, for the rescuing of futures. And we thank you for that call, and we ask you to help us to honor it, to draw together all that you have given to us, that we might use it in a way that blesses this community and especially blesses our youth. We ask for your strength. We ask for your reminder. But most of all, we ask for your vision and heart, that we might indeed stand in the gap for the youth of our community. We thank you for drawing us together today, and we pray that you would be in our midst. I pray this in the name of Jesus, our Savior. Amen.
I would now like to invite Michelle Anderson and Bill Earhart to come up to the podium for their
Good morning. Each year, Youth First Community of Promise, actually, if I could invite all of the Partner of Promise Award winners up here, Anthony, Janet, and Sonia, and also Brenda Nolby. Thank you. Each year, Youth First Community of Promise selects recipients from the communities we serve for the Partner of Promise Awards. Like Mayor Trude mentioned, it's partners from all over. It's businesses, it's government, it's law enforcement, it's civic groups, it's faith-based communities, and individuals, all who have supported Youth First Community of Promise and youth in their community. This year, we're proud to recognize the following Partners of Promise. We're a little out of order here. So our first award goes to Jam Hops, and we have Brenda Nolby and her husband Craig also, who are the owners. And each year Jam Hops selects local nonprofits such as Youth First to benefit from their Jam Hops Gives Back fundraising campaign. They've collected food, school supplies, hygiene products, and donations for Youth First. These items are an asset to the youth and the families that we work with. They also do an incredible job of raising awareness for our organization through their website and their events. Through these efforts, Jam Hops is helping extend our reach even further into our community. So thank you. And next we'll call up here Anthony and Jeff. He told me his name like 30 seconds ago. How could I possibly remember that? Anthony and Jeff from Dunn Brothers. Our second award does go to Dunn Brothers Coffee. Over the past 10 years, Dunn Brothers has eagerly participated in our annual Taste of Community fundraiser, bringing their delicious pastries and coffees. Additionally, Anthony and his staff have generously donated coffee and the best hot chocolate ever to our fundraising events and program activities. This generous donation has been a great way for Youth First to raise funds, and it's also a delicious way to reward our youth. So thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Jeff. Sorry about that. No, that's fine. All right. And our third award goes to TPC Rose, and Janet and Sonia are going to be coming up here to receive the award. Last spring, TPC Rose selected Youth First as the beneficiary of their 2014 fundraising efforts. So they fundraised all year, and we were the beneficiary. This amazing group of women, again, spent the entire year fundraising and raising awareness for Youth First. In December, they presented us with the largest donation they have ever given out in all of their years of doing this. These funds will be used to install a kitchen at the Ramsey Center, and with that, we'll be able to teach kids life skills and how to prepare and have a healthy start by making some of their own food and just learning some of the things that most of us would take for granted learning from family. This kitchen will also help to a donation will also help to sustain and grow the organization over the next several years, and we're honored to have been a recipient of the TPC Rose fundraising efforts and wish them well as they continue to do great and amazing things in our community. And when we present them with our award, they would also like to say a few words. So thank you so much. Great.
Good morning. I just wanted to take a moment to let you know that TPC Rose was truly honored to be able to work with Youth First. It was an eye-opener for our ladies in our organization to see what they are accomplishing with the youth of Anoka and truly the needs of the families and the youth in Anoka. We did work, we had a dinner that we prepared and served to the families. It was just awesome to see them interact, and the community, the feeling they have in the room when they're together is just amazing. You can see the work that they're doing and how great it is. And also at our gala, we used several of the youth from Youth First to help us with various volunteering, and those kids were amazing. They were totally out of their comfort zone. I mean, who isn't when everybody's dressed up and whatever? But it was awesome. They're respectful, just great kids, and it was great to see them and have them involved in our stuff. So we're so pleased to be getting this award from you, but it was our honor to fundraise for Youth First.
Thank you so much.
So you can just see the amazing things. All of you here are partners of Promise, and that you're here, you're supporting the organization, you're learning more, you're getting the word out, and we're just so honored to have all of you and our Partner of Promise Award winners this year. So if you would join me in thanking them again. Truly, without all of the support we receive from our partners in the community, we would not be able to provide the quality enriching programs that allow us to fulfill the 5 promises of Youth First. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here, and to our Partner of Promise Award winners this year.
I would just like to mention, too, that in addition to living in Anoka, my husband teaches at Franklin. I have kids at Franklin, Anoka Middle School for the Arts, and at the high school. And I also volunteer, and I see the need out there, and what you guys are doing here is wonderful. You really are making such a huge difference in so many families' lives. And I want to personally thank you for that. I think it's so important what you're doing. So, okay. Now, I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker this morning, Dr. Shar Michael Bust. Good morning. Let's tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Michael Bust is the past executive director of Mental Health and Partnerships in Intermediate District 287, which is a consortium of 12 Hennepin County school districts. She conducts local, state, and national training in social emotional learning, alternatives to exclusionary practices in school, the impact of poverty on learning, brain-based teaching, child and teen mental health disorders, mindful education, and school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports. She co-facilitates A Better Way, an Intermediate District 287 school leader cohort professional development series designed to eliminate exclusionary practices in our schools that result in disproportionate dropout rates of our most vulnerable adults. Shar was the regional director and contributing author for the Mind Up curriculum, a Goldie Hawn Foundation evidence-based social emotional learning curriculum for youth. It was published by Scholastic and endorsed by the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, the gold standard for evidence-based programs for youth. She's a process communication model trainer, helping people to connect by learning to understand communication channels that will resonate with others, and a nationally certified Eric Jensen brain-based education consultant. Shar was the counseling clinic coordinator at Hazelden Fellowship Club in St. Paul, Minnesota, and has an extensive background in the treatment of chemical dependency. Please help me welcome Dr. Shar Michael Bust.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to be here this morning. I'm honored, actually, to have been asked to speak to all of you today. This topic is, of course, very serious, so we need to prepare ourselves for some reflective thinking and consideration of some of the messages I'm about to deliver. But before I start, just a little bit of levity. This morning, I had a tin in my purse, and I thought I was taking out a breath mint. And I've been traveling back and forth to Florida, and when I put it in my mouth, I realized that it was an Ambien, which is a sleeping pill. So, and I know it's not a recommended practice before you're delivering a keynote address. So I quickly got as much of it out of my mouth as I could. But if I do just fall asleep on the stage, at least you'll know why. So the wrong side of the tracks, how poverty impacts student learning and mental health. This little girl happens to be my granddaughter. I didn't need to get permission to show her in a slideshow, nor publish her picture in the paper, so I used her as my child. In the Huffington Post recently, there was an article about poverty in the United States. And what it said basically is that we have seen staggering increases in poverty in the United States. And by many factors, when we weigh child welfare around the world, in civilized countries, the United States is number 20 when it comes to providing for the care and the support and the education and the healthy living experiences that children need in order to become fully functional, capable, and healthy adults. We know that in parts of the country, like the South, for sure, and the West, out California way, the majority of public school students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Think about that for a minute. The majority of public school students in places like Texas and California qualify for free and reduced lunch. So by federal standards, that means that they are poor. The U.S. has a greater percentage of children living in poverty than any other advanced nation in the world. We're number one in child poverty among what we call civilized countries. So what is the standard definition of poverty? Sometimes we don't have a common understanding of what that means. It's basically a person who doesn't have money that would be in the socially acceptable range. The U.S. Census Bureau uses a set of monetary income thresholds to determine whether a family is living in poverty, and then there's another threshold for people who are living in a low income status range. When a family qualifies and reaches that threshold, every single person living in the house is considered to be living in poverty. So if the parents are living in poverty, it's automatically concluded that the children in the home are living in poverty. And here's an example of what might be a family living in poverty. So this particular family has 5 members, 2 children, a mother, a father, and an aunt. And their threshold was $28,087 in 2012. These were the members' incomes in the home. The mother earned $10,000, the father $9,000. There was an aunt living in the home who earned $10,000. So the total family income in this particular family of 5 is $29,000. This particular family was 0.03 over the threshold for being considered a family living in poverty. So this family was not eligible for certain services and benefits that come along with living in an impoverished environment. We have some new 2015 federal poverty guidelines. 100% of the poverty level for a family of 4 is now $24,250. For a family of 2, it's $15,930. I was just reading an article about a McDonald's worker who worked full-time who earned just a little over $13,000 a year for full-time employment. So in that particular family, even though the person is working full-time, the family would be considered to be living in poverty. And then it goes up commensurate with the number of people in the family, but as an example, in a family of 8, that threshold is $40,890. When we look at child poverty statistics in the nation, 22% of American children live in poverty. When there's a single female household head, that number jumps to over 30%. So fully a third of our kids living in single parent households headed by women are going to be living in poverty. And that rate jumps to 70% when we consider low income thresholds. So if we bump it up a little bit, the family's still struggling, but not in poverty, just have low income. Among children with disabilities, and this is very important, 28% are poor. And when we think of disabilities, those of you who live in communities where you have special education programs, which basically is every public school community in the nation, or those of you who work in schools, you know your population of children who have disabilities. Some of you are parents of children with disabilities. One of the reasons that children with disabilities are living in poverty. There are a lot of costs associated with having a child with a disability. There are a lot of stressors on the family, sometimes expensive vehicles, other equipment, those kinds of things. And perhaps a parent has to quit a job to be able to stay home to care for a child who has a significant disability. There are many reasons for that. But just know that if you're working with children with disabilities, there's an elevated risk. We know that poverty is multicultural. There's sometimes a view that it's people of color in the United States who are living in poverty. Minnesota is an interesting place because our biggest poverty population is not the African American population. If we look at northern Minnesota, the American Indian, Native American population is the most significant group living in poverty, as well as Caucasian people living in northern Minnesota. We know that people living in poverty are at an increased risk of mental illness. The reason for that is that anytime we're living in a stressful situation, our stress level triggers mental health disorders. And any of you who have mental health disorders in your family or perhaps struggle with a mental illness yourself know that when things are going well and when you're feeling at peace and mindful, or your family member is, that the mental health disorder does not present itself as radically as it does when a person is struggling with other stressors in life. People living in poverty witness and are victims of more trauma. So our children who are living in poor households are experiencing a great deal of trauma at home related to factors that go along with poverty. And that's what's kind of interesting, is that poverty in and of itself is not a risk factor. If there were a person in this room who had a good social network, friends, supportive family, you worked at a good job, and suddenly lost your job and had no money the next day, you still have all these social supports and systems where you can network, you know, maybe LinkedIn, maybe call a friend who knows somebody, kind of thing. Get emotional support from your family. When people live in poverty, they tend to not have all those social supports. So it's not just the money, it's the attending factors that go along with poverty. With mental illness, they have higher health costs. People who struggle with mental illness, difficulty getting and retaining jobs. Think about a mental health disorder like bipolar, where a person may have swings of depression and then a month later have mania and excessive energy. It's really hard to keep a job because you never know what's going to happen at work on any given day. And sometimes people tend to lose jobs because of their mental health disorders. They suffer social stigma and isolation as well. So sometimes people say, can we just give economic help and won't that cure this poverty problem? But the research has shown that unconditional cash transfers just don't work. They're not effective in helping people get lifted out of poverty. And in some ways, they give people living in poverty a lot of stress because then they feel responsible for doing something about their conditions and don't really know exactly what to do. We do know that improvements in mental health functioning lead to improved economic health. So one of the best things we can do for children living in poverty is to support their social and emotional development. And when I look at the 5 promises, you know, if I had to give a recipe for how to help kids living in poverty, it would be exactly this recipe. The whole idea of having relationships with caring adults. Many children who live in trauma say that there's nobody at home who cares about them. And if there can be one person in the community, whether it be a teacher, a police officer, a therapist, a person in a business, whatever level of support can be provided, is going to be helpful for that child. The research shows that when kids have good outcomes in life, even when they've experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of poverty, adverse childhood experiences, that if they have one consistent caring adult in their lives, they have outcomes that are much improved. So just being one person in the life of a child can have a significant impact, and it doesn't have to be the parent. It could be a neighbor and any of the other roles that I mentioned. So the public policy implications for those of you who are in government, availability of mental health services is a public health and human rights issue, and we've made some big strides in Minnesota the past couple years through the advocacy of the National Alliance for Mental Illness, Sue Abderholden is a lobbyist who, not a lobbyist, but actually an executive who lobbies for children's rights and for mental health care for those who need it. We also know that addressing mental health is critical for international economic development, and that the link between income and ill health is stronger for mental health than for general health conditions. And we know that worsening conditions can exacerbate mental health issues, so there's a big tie-in there. So there are many faces of poverty. There are actually 4 different kinds of poverty. And in order to remember the 4 different kinds of poverty, I made up an acronym called RAGS. It helps me remember them. The first one is relative, and that's, do I feel poor? You can still make a living wage and feel poor. An example there is that Goldie Hawn, who I used to work for, has a home in Aspen, one of her several homes. She has a home in Aspen. So we would do a lot of training out at her ranch and in the school system in Aspen. And I felt really poor in Aspen, I have to say. It was, I'd see a little place that looked like it was falling apart on Main Street, and I'd ask one of the people I was with, how much do you think that would cost? Oh, that's probably $1 million. And it's just falling apart, and somebody would buy it for a little city lot size to build a tall mega something there. So a lot of the people who live in Aspen, who are regular working people, who would be middle class in the rest of the world, live in subsidized housing. The teachers live in subsidized housing. The town actually pays part of their rent. The people like fire people, police officers, people who are providing support to the infrastructure of the community are living in subsidized housing in Aspen. So that's what relative poverty is. Am I really poor? No, but I sure feel like it when I'm hanging around these people. Then there's absolute. And we have very little of this in the U.S. We generally would think about maybe Slumdog Millionaires or someplace in India where people don't have running water, where children are eating garbage, where they're sleeping in dirt. There's some of this in the United States, unfortunately, but it's not our most typical kind of poverty. People are in survival mode. Any of you who work in schools know we have a lot of homeless kids now. Many of those kids are living in that survival mode because of their economic situation. Then there's generational poverty, and that's the kind of poverty where my parents were poor, my grandparents were poor, my great-grandparents were poor, my kids are going to be poor. Sometimes kids even inherit debts from their parents. There are bills that need to be settled and debts that need to be paid. So rather than get an inheritance, they end up in a worse economic situation. And then situational poverty, and that's the kind where there's a life crisis and all of a sudden somebody loses a job. Maybe some of the Target employees are experiencing that now, although it sounds like they're getting recruited like crazy from other companies, so maybe not. Maybe they're looking at it as getting double paid for a few months, who knows? But oftentimes when people suddenly lose a job and they don't have the expectation that they're going to, that can throw them into a situational poverty. Happened in our housing market where people were counting on the value of their homes being some sort of financial security in the future, and that ended up to not be the case for many families. I think I'm going the wrong way. I think I'm stuck here a little bit. Is the tech person here? My clicker isn't. I'll just switch to here. Will that work? Thank you. Sorry about that. So we talked about RAGS. Is a poverty level income enough to support a family? Families generally need an income equal to about 2 times the federal poverty level to meet their basic needs. So when we talk about a family living in poverty, we're not talking about bumping up their income $5,000 and they'll be out of poverty. Generally, the standard is very, very low. And so we're looking at twice what is projected as living in poverty. So when we talk about a family of 4, 36,375 would be referred to as low income. Family of 3 would be a little over 30,000, and a family of 2 would be almost 24,000. Some generalizations about poverty. School personnel and community interventionists need to shift mindsets in order to effectively teach children of poverty and to reach them. It's a chronic condition, and it affects the mind and the body and the soul of children. So we have to have many multi-tiered, multi-level interventions and supports. And it's much more than low socioeconomic status. There are associated risks that adversely impact the developing brain of a child who grows up in poverty. How many of you have heard of the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study? Okay, this is probably one of the biggest, most famous studies that you've never heard of. And it's really interesting because this study occurred in the 1990s, and it's just now getting rolled out in terms of its importance. There in Minnesota now we have cohorts of people being trained to educate people about the ACE study. And basically what the ACE study was Kaiser Permanente Medical Group wanted to launch a study to find out what factors, if any, contributed to obesity. Started out being an obesity study. And as they studied people, there were 17,000 participants in the study, so it was a huge study. They started realizing that they were onto something else. And what they were onto was that adverse childhood experiences shorten people's lives significantly. And they got very enthused about this research because they decided if they could predict who was at risk, then intervention would be more tied to something that was evidence-based. They found that children who had a certain cluster of adverse childhood experiences had social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, adoption of risky health behaviors, and we know that early smoking, early drinking, unprotected sex, those kinds of behaviors that are risk-taking that kids get involved in when they don't have a lot of social supports. Then eventually, the people who had all these adverse experiences developed diseases, disabilities, social problems. And study after study after study that have been replication studies of this particular project have borne the same results. So it's really fascinating, and you actually can take your own risk factor exam if you want to, and I'll tell you how you can do that. We did it in my school district with some school administrators, and we had a couple school administrators who had almost all of the risk factors identified in this study, yet were functioning pretty effectively in the world. So it's not necessarily a direct correlation and a done deal. However, the risk is significantly elevated when people have a lot of risk factors. And I'll tell you what some of those risk factors are in a minute. If we do nothing when we know children are exposed to all these risk factors, the likelihood of poor outcomes is very high. So what can city leaders do to reduce the impact of poverty on learning? What can we do? What can organizations like Youth First, Community of Promise do to help our children? Because our comfort level will often be with kids we really believe we can help, so we need to have a mind shift, and we need to go from a fixed mindset about this is over for this kid, there's nothing we can do. And we've all heard our fellow workers sometimes say that, what are you gonna do? You know, they're living in poverty, the mom's in prison, the dad's a drug addict, the kid was abused. You know, there's really nothing that we can do. But that's not true. There is. We can impact the developing brain in a child. There are many social ills that need to be fixed, but we all have limited influence over public policy. We can maybe impact our own community in some way. We also have limited influence over neighbors and families. But when we are in front of a child, and we are working with a child and providing resources and helping them with community volunteerism and providing emotional support, helping them learn some life skills, that's what's going to make a difference. These are some of the risk factors that impact outcomes for young people. A cumulative decline in test scores is associated when all of these risk factors are present. So if the child identifies that they have an unsupportive home life, that's identified usually by a question that asks, do you feel like anybody loves you in your home? Is there anybody who cares about you in your home? Low maternal education, so if the mother did not graduate from high school, or in some cases didn't complete junior high school or middle school. Maternal tobacco and drug use seems to be related. Poor prenatal care, teen pregnancy predicts a negative outcome. Poor nutrition, which often goes along with poverty. Inadequate schools, not enough supports for kids who are living in poverty. Just having a poverty income is a significant risk factor. Exposure to neurotoxic substances, things like lead paint, pesticide exposure, all things that happen to kids who live in substandard housing, which is often the case with children living in poverty. But poverty is not actually about money, because if we give money to a homeless person, chances are their life isn't going to change. When the person's on the street corner with a sign, that I saw one the other day that said, no bed tonight, and then people were driving by and giving the person money. There's not much evidence to show that that helps. It might make people feel good. Oftentimes, of course, that money goes to drugs and alcohol. So we have to be careful to put our resources where it really matters, which is why an organization such as this is perfect, because we know the resources will be used well and that they will help kids directly. So can and do brains change as a result of experience? Do children living in poverty have different experiences than children who are not poor? Do children in poverty have different types of crises and opportunities than other children? Absolutely. There's a science of poverty and achievement now that's pretty exciting, and the reason it's exciting is that there's just a lot of research about how we can change the brains of kids living in poverty. There's a researcher and an author named Eric Jensen who's written a couple books about what to do when kids are living in poverty, and he talks about enrichment activities. So in schools, for those of you who are educators, and I'm one of them, oftentimes we had enrichment programs for the gifted and talented, and they were the ones who got the extra stuff, the interesting stuff, the hands-on community stuff, following a mentor in a work site in the community. What we know now is that that's good for all kids, and it's particularly good for children who don't have those experiences at home. So we need to make sure that we add whatever's missing. And we know the school can't do everything, but certainly as a community, we can accomplish a lot. So we need to know why something works. We need to know that it works. We need to know how it works. And what we do know about the brain is that it's not a vessel that we just fill up. We actually interact with it, and it changes and it grows all the way through age 25. And most of us have heard that a few times by now. But 25 years old is when our brains are done developing, as a rule. We all know people where that's probably not the case, but as a rule, it's 25. Then when we think about, kids driving when they're 16 years old, we think about people entering the military when they're 18, all of the things that children's brains are involved in. It is something to reflect about because their brains are still developing. We know that brains are malleable. They change according to experience. The brain absorbs positives, so it doesn't just absorb negatives. So when a child is living in a traumatic environment, and when bad things are happening to them, they also absorb positives that are provided by folks in this room, by people who care about kids and who connect with kids, who emotionally attune with kids. We had an interview panel with some principals earlier this week, and we had 4 boys who were adjudicated to the Hennepin County Homeschool. And that's a juvenile detention facility in Minnetonka. And we asked them about their lives, and so what happened? And one boy was telling the story of being 10 years old, and he was at school. He was living with his grandmother who didn't speak English. She had immigrated from Somalia, parents in prison, and he was in a classroom, and somebody had said something about his sister, and he pushed the other student, and the SRO was called, and the child was arrested in front of his peers, and then left school. And we said, and then what happened? And he said, I never went back. And we were kind of aghast. You mean at 10 years old, you didn't return to school? How old are you now? 13. Hadn't been in school for 3 years. So those kinds of things will affect the trajectory of his life. His life is forever changed by an experience like that. This was a kid who was very bright, who was very articulate, and I was thinking, how did he pick up these language skills living out on the street for 3 years? But pretty amazing. So he could be something. And when I asked him who he connected with most in his life, he said his science teacher, which surprised me. He said, I loved science. And I said, what was it about it? Well, he always said hi to me. He called my name. He connected with me. He told me I was smart. You know, it just fired off all of these things that he was told by his science teacher. And that's the person he remembers 3 years later. So how do we know that poverty changes the brain? We know this through neuroplasticity, neurogenesis research, and that's the process that makes the brain connections stronger. It's use it or lose it with your brain. You know, we used to think our brains were downhill after 40. You know, we used to always have those 40th birthday parties and everybody wore dark colors and, you know, gave funeral cards and all that. But that's not the way that it actually is. People can get brighter and brighter and brighter the more they age. And we know that actually through some science research from Sweden, where people were actually dying of cancer, and they taught the patients something new every single day. And when they autopsied the brains after the patients died, they had new neural connections all over their brains, just from learning something new in the hospital every day, even as they were, you know, checking out of this earth. So it's pretty amazing. We also know that the brain changes as a result of genes. We all have our own genetic load. We inherited, you know, that from our parents. But genes and environment interact. And so just because we have a certain genetic blueprint, it does not mean that things are necessarily going to go in a certain direction. An example there is that if there are two tall parents, it's very likely that their child or children are going to be tall. But if that child is locked in a closet and lives in the dark, that child's not going to be tall. The environment in that case has more of an influence than the genetic inheritance. If we just look at a simulation of a brain scan, when you see the two circles in the part of the slide where the brain is not activated, and then the slide on the right shows red marks inside the circles where the brain is activated, that happens by doing a targeted reading intervention program. So you're actually teaching the brain where the reading center is. And kids who have learning disabilities and struggle with reading are oftentimes trying to use the wrong parts of their brain to read. So this happens to be a program called Fast Forward, but there are many programs like it, but just targeted interventions to teach the brain how to read, and the brain changes once it learns how to read. All of these things impact the growing brain. Things like, you know, activity distribution in the brain, chemical levels, blood flow. Our brains basically operate on oxygen and on water. So if we keep ourselves hydrated and we breathe deeply, that can help our brains be optimal in functioning. Movement activates the brain. So people who exercise are smarter than people who don't. Somebody once said to me, yeah, but what about the NFL? There are always exceptions. No, a lot of the NFL players are very bright. It's just we happen to read about the ones who make some silly decisions sometimes. So all of these things change in the brain, and we as adults can manipulate kids' brains. Here's an example. Many of us have heard of serotonin. Serotonin is the neurochemical in the brain that makes us feel like all is well with the world. It's that kind of relaxing, you know, you're okay, I'm in my zone neurochemical. We can help kids manufacture that in their brains by attuning with them, having eye contact, by leaning in, by calling them by name, and by smiling. We increase serotonin in their brains. So kids who are used to scowly faces, angry words, need to have that balanced out with friendly, warm, inviting, you don't scare me, I'm leaning in, I want to support you kinds of brains. And being creative in what we say to kids. I was doing a workshop the other day, and a teacher said to me, well, what do you do when a kid said, I'm not doing what you tell me to do, you're not the boss of me? And I said, you look at them and you say, that's exactly what I want you to say to a drug dealer when he approaches you. But there are ways that we can be creative in how we respond to kids. Then that takes the edge off the moment, and then we can move on, go on to the next thing. We want to tell parents about the changes we expect. One time I had a mother call me because I was working with her son, and she said, well, I don't exactly know how to say this, but I think you're trying to change his brain. And I said, exactly, exactly. If teachers don't change kids' brains, then they're not learning. That's what happens to the brain when a child learns. So that's what we're about, is changing brains. Targeted teaching, therapy changes the brain. You know, some kids are on psychotropic medication, and if they need to take psychotropic medication, that's between the child and their family and the care provider. We also know, though, that cognitive behavioral therapy changes the brain. So sometimes kids get as much benefit out of being in a therapeutic relationship with a kind person who knows what they're doing. So nature has given us a second chance. So we're born with what we're born with, but we have lots of opportunities to get help from the environment. We, with gene expression, you know, you see people in the same family, they might have a gene for depression, one person gets it, the other one doesn't. They live in different environments. Even identical twins live in different environments. If you ask a pair of identical twins which was born first, the firstborn's hand goes up right away. They're already differentiating themselves, even though they're identical twins. It's all about how are we like, how are we different. So we need to know that we, in many ways, can impact what happens once the genes are in place. Actually, environment determines about 2/3 of who we become. So 1/3 is what we're born with, 2/3 what we've been exposed to, how we've interpreted it, what we've done about it, our own resiliency, our own grit, those kinds of things make a difference in our life outcomes. So that's a compelling argument for developing strategies and having hope for all kids. We never want to give up on a student. Our brains are actually designed to change, and experiences can change children's brains for the better. It's unprofessional and unethical for us to give up, and we know that science supports the potential for change. There's a lot of research about that. So here's what kids need when they're growing up in poverty. They need emotional support, and I see that here with ongoing relationships with caring adults. They need attachment, same thing there. They need to have an adult who they feel connected to. They need safe places, and that would be in the category of health and safety support. They need cognitive stimulation, and that would fit in with an effective education. So all of these things that are evidence-based, that science has proven, tie so nicely with your 5 promises. It's just kind of amazing. It was like you have the menu right here. And that's what kids who live in poverty need. They need reliable caregivers. Don't take the lack of trust personally. With some kids, it's very functional for them to move away from adults. It protects them. If a child's abused at home, they don't want to be near adults. So if they flee from you, it's functional. They're taking care of themselves. It's an adaptive change that they've learned. And they need at least one teacher or one adult or one caring person in the community who's just rock solid for them, who forgives them for mistakes, who comes back and is always there for them and says, you know what, you're developing, you're growing, I'm in your corner, and we'll get this together. For cognitive stimulation in schools, we need to provide enrichment activities, lots of movement. And that's one thing we haven't been great at in schools, is providing opportunities for movement. The reason is that when we're moving, we are actually activating the brain, because this back part of the brain, right kind of at the base of the brain, is called the cerebellum. It hangs like a bell from the back of the brain. And that part of the brain has more neurons, more nerve cells than any other part of the brain. And it's activated when people move. And it's why those of us who have our respected police officers in here, it's why there might be walking a line saying numbers backwards, because your cerebellum, if you're driving drunk, gets all screwed up. You can't do those things because it's involved in sequencing. So it's the cerebellum of the brain that gets intoxicated. It's the first part of the brain that gets intoxicated. And that's why those motor tests are often conducted to see if a person is able to put one foot in front of the other and is able to do a sequence of numbers. Now, of course, we have the breath test also, which is probably a preferred way. Yeah, that's, I think, all I want to say about that. Well, maybe mindful education. The other piece of research that's really coming out now is engaging in mindfulness, which is deep breathing, on a daily basis. It's relaxing. We know that Buddhist monks are really, really smart, and they spend most of the day meditating. So having a little time for that kind of personal practice, just being still for a while, breathing, paying attention to the environment, just getting in your zone. If you can do that every day for just a few minutes, it will reduce your stress level considerably. And then social interaction and social status is an important one for kids living in poverty. They don't have social status, so we have to help give it to them. And the way that we do that is we don't say things about material possessions, or we don't give compliments based on, cute outfits and that kind of thing. Instead, it could be something like, I was walking in today with Javanti, and he was telling me something really interesting, and he's going to share that with you later on. And Javanti and I will have had a conversation, and he's prepared to do that. I'm elevating his social status then among his classmates or among other teachers, because I'm pointing out that there's an intellectual something that he has to offer, rather than that he has the most expensive Nikes on. Teaching kids to focus. Kids who live in poverty often don't have that ability to get their frontal lobe engaged and to focus. Because they're worried about where their next meal is coming from. And then with health and safety support, we have the Safe Schools legislative initiative in Minnesota now, Safe and Supportive Schools, and we're supposed to be working on bullying. It's a great opportunity to help teach kids about making sure that they're respectful of children of all socioeconomic levels, and that kids should not be teased because they don't have the right clothes or don't live in the right neighborhood. From ages 0 to 5, the world is downloaded into the brain, and the highly immature frontal lobes are unable to delete or reframe negative input. So what happens is that child grows up, they're hardwired for disharmony, they're hardwired to seek patterns that are familiar to them. If it's familiar for them to have an adult yelling at them, that feels more comfortable to them at first than having somebody be nurturing and caring. And so kids will seek those patterns, and they'll try to get you to engage in the behavior that's familiar to them. That's why sometimes it seems like, well, why can't that kid just see I love them and I'm trying to help them? It's not familiar to them. It takes a while for them to come to trust. Then we have kids who are very food insecure, which is why I love the work around making sure that there are snacks available in the summer, packing things for kids to bring home, because there are kids who do not have, as we know, adequate food at home. Plus, when they do have something, it's generally junk food kind of stuff. If any of you know the Midway Airport area in Chicago, every time I drive by that area, I'm just struck by every single store is a junk food, convenience store, and it's all McDonald's and Burger King's and, all the fast food stores. And there isn't a nice grocery store. You don't see a nice grocery store in that neighborhood anywhere. So people don't get things like bananas, avocados, turkey, and they all produce tryptophan. They all have tryptophan, and that converts into serotonin. So that's why after you have a turkey dinner on Thanksgiving, you feel like going to sleep, taking a nap, because the tryptophan has been converted to serotonin that just relaxes you. You want to take a nap. So people don't get that kind of stuff, and then that impacts the developing brain. And it also contributes to people making poor decisions. So we know that children who are food insecure have smaller increases in math and reading scores over time. They have lower overall scores compared to those who have no food insecurities. We know that poor nutrition impacts brain development. It impacts the hippocampus, which is a little structure about this big in the brain that is responsible for short-term memory. And when it doesn't get what it needs, it starts to shrink. The same thing happens when a person is abusing chemicals on a regular basis. The hippocampus shrinks, and we don't know how to make it grow back once it does shrink. So we want to make sure that we're getting good nutrition to our kids. And we know that they'll have continued learning and memory lapses in later years, and we just have to keep hanging in there with them and supporting them. They also have this risk of toxic exposure to contaminated food, water, housing, poor air quality, and that stresses out the entire nervous system. They also experience less social support. They have parent interactions that are more clipped and more negative than kids who don't live in poverty. The parents are apt to be more authoritarian rather than authoritative. An authoritative parent is one that here are the rules and we expect everyone to follow them, and I'll support you in making sure that you know how to do the right thing. But people who are authoritarian are do this because I say so, sit down and shut up, that kind of behavioral attitude towards kids. And so then the kids tend to develop that oppositional kind of personality. Their parents are less involved in school activity. So in Minnesota, the highest poverty areas are going to be up northern Minnesota, the Bemidji area. That's the poorest part of the state. 25% of all children who live in Beltrami County live in poverty. Again, the Indian reservations are where there are clusters of poverty. The other poorest counties in Minnesota are Mahnomen, Cook, Aiken, and Panema. Those 4 counties. And Aiken, of course, is up in that Lake Mille Lacs area. In Anoka County, Anoka is ranked 13th in poverty in the state. The median household income in Anoka is $70,800. And a little over 8% of the residents lived below the poverty level in 2012. That declined actually in 2013. So the trend data tends to come in late, but it'll be interesting to see if that trend continues. Of course, the economy has improved somewhat now, so one might expect that it would continue to improve. About 9% of children under age 6 live in poverty, and almost 11% of children under the age of 18. The cost of living index in this area is 112.9, which means it's about 12% more expensive to live here than more typical parts of the state. And I don't know what the reasons are for that. Some of you maybe know if it's commuting, more gas expenses, or whatever it might be. Then in the Anoka-Hennepin School District, 34.6% when this information was gathered were eligible for free and reduced lunch. What we know about free and reduced lunch is that sometimes parents don't report that they're eligible. It's an embarrassment for the family. So sometimes there are kids who would qualify who don't get it because their parents do not want the school to have that information. Coon Rapids has the highest free and reduced lunch high school with 36%, and Andover is the lowest with 13%. Of the 7 middle schools, Coon Rapids Middle, 47% free and reduced, and Oakview has 19%. And then so on and so on. We have Andover and McKinley at 17, Adams at 60, and we know that families in Anoka County have the lowest per capita income in the 7-county metro area. So that's bringing it home for you in this community. We know that greater poverty is correlated with a greater percent of disabilities. And here's an interesting kind of alarming example. This is a 3-year-old child's brain on the left that's developing normally, and a child who's experienced extreme neglect has a brain about half the size. And that is the difference also between a brain that had a healthy pregnancy and a brain that developed in a mother who was using drugs, or was born, if the baby was born with fetal alcohol spectrum. So it's pretty significant. Now this is extreme neglect, remember. This could be that this child was exposed to alcohol in utero, was locked in a closet, was physically abused. I mean, this is extreme neglect. But just know that that has variations, and even mild neglect can have an impact on the developing brain. The mental health disorders that we see in children who have been living in poverty are things like ADHD, depression, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder. The kids with conduct disorder often end up in correctional facilities, so start out being kids who are presenting with ADHD when they're in elementary school. By the time they get to high school, they're locked up. So I talked about mindfulness strategies as being good. The good news, and I'll wrap up with this, is that brains are designed to adapt to experience. IQs can be improved. We can't give up on kids. And in fact, kids who have lower borderline IQs can improve more than kids who have high IQs. There's more ability to impact a lower functioning IQ than there is, say, moving a child who has a 130 IQ to 150. It's much more likely to be able to take a child who has a 80 or 85 IQ and get them to the normal range. So we used to think that IQ is fixed, and now we know it's not. We can actually improve IQ. So that is poverty in a nutshell, I guess, and thank you so much for the good work you do, and use this as your template to keep on keeping on with the great work that you're doing with kids, because that's what the evidence shows works. Thank you.
One more round of applause for Dr. Shar Michael Bust. I actually learned a few things this morning, so you've helped create some new connections in my brain. Thank you so much. Thank you. This is wonderful information and so important that we all know all about this. Thank you. Now we will see a short video this morning that further highlights the important work of Youth First.
I just feel so loved and welcomed there all the time.
For me, it almost feels like a second home.
The program itself is just so motivating, and everything changed for me.
When I first became mayor, the discussion came up that they have this Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. I think they were in maybe the first 2 or 3 years of having it. And that's how I kind of got to know what was going on with the organization and finding out the great things that they were doing.
Right away got hooked and said, this is good for kids, this is a great partnership, we should continue to do this.
Well, I heard about it last year, my first year here with the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast. Life-changing for the kids and life-changing for all of us, because it provides a way for all of us to come together as community and be community. When we talk about a community of promise, that's what we're acting on. You know, it's not just up here and a good thought, but we're acting on it, and we're inviting each other to do that.
I'm definitely sold on the program. 100%. Does great things for kids.
Do you know what to do there?
For a number of our students that don't necessarily want to go home, it's a place for them to go, to get help with their academics, and sometimes just to talk through some things that are going on in their lives. It's just another support and a resource for our kids.
I just gave up on life itself, you know, with school and everything.
My brothers would go there after school for help, and they kind of told me about it, so I started going.
And it's a place to come and get your work done and stay out of trouble at the same time, you know.
Well, the many stories that you hear from the kids that have gone through it and have, the way they tell their story of how it's helped them and the emotion with which they tell it is just compelling to see the people that have worked with the organization.
The need is just so great in our whole community. Lots of folks falling through the cracks.
So now we have a safe place, a caring place where they go. Heidi worked with us to get a classroom procured where she serves them a snack, and they come in and they work on the computers. She talks to them about their grades, about their homework, and about life.
A lot of people need help after school, and me, I didn't have help. I was failing classes, and then going to youth group, I got my grades up. I feel like a better person.
I was struggling with my English class at first. I decided to, you know, stop in and meet Heidi, and I did. And then we just clicked, and I have more self-esteem, and I'm more focused on school. Now I'm graduating. I'm just a new me ever since I met Heidi and ever since I went to that program.
Literally when she sees you, she opens her eyes and she comes and hugs you and welcome. I just love that all the time. I really do.
I feel like that there's someone there that cares for me more than more than a student, you know, sees me beyond a student and knows that I have a future ahead of me and really cares for me.
Besides the snacks that everybody likes that she brings us, you know, she also tries to, I guess, better ourselves, interact with each other, you know, make friends too, and also get our work done.
I feel welcomed, loved. She doesn't treat me like a student. She treats me more like family.
We've become very much aware, not only of the need, but of the great support and passion that's in this community, and Youth First is a great leader in that.
It really is a compelling story, and it shows the good work that you can do when you have groups coming together, cities, the county, businesses throughout Anoka County that have come together to help these kids and to, not only for the kids, but for the people that volunteer as well, and just being involved in it makes you feel good as well, and that's kind of the part of it that I've enjoyed as part of that too.
And it's just another great opportunity for us as a school to partner with, I think, an organization that really cares about kids. So it's just another blanket we can put around our kids to keep them moving in the right direction so that in the future they have those opportunities. That if they didn't come and do some of this stuff that Youth First offers them, a safe place to go, an opportunity for them to get things done, I don't know what they'd end up doing in the future.
You know, when I went to that first Mayor's prayer breakfast, it was just stunning, you know, to see the support there, how many people were there representing the whole community and all walks of life from our community coming together. And I think it's just a very pivotal time in the life of our Anoka County community to see that, to see the need, but also to see that there are lots of people who want to make a difference, and when we come together, it's huge.
Thank you to Martha Weaver West, my friend back there, and Eric Thorson from Anoka County for that wonderful video and for really keeping the community informed of the great work of Youth First. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I do want to thank you for being here this morning to support the work of Youth First. If you ever have the opportunity to visit a Youth First location or to volunteer your time with this wonderful organization, I would encourage you to please do so. If you visit the Ramsey Center, one of the first things that you will see there is a wall of graduates. Perhaps you saw that in the video. These are pictures of program participants who have successfully graduated high school and gone on to bigger and better things. Above the pictures is a quote that truly summarizes these youth, and I was told to really emphasize this quote. It's very important. Some succeed because they are destined. Others succeed because they are determined. Thank you for helping us ensure that Youth First is there to help these determined youth continue to be successful. Now I would like to welcome Pastor David Lekelt from Lord of Life Church in Ramsey to conclude this morning's events with a benediction.
I think I need to meet with Tony to develop some of that auctioneer's language. Wouldn't that be fun for Sunday morning sermons? Well, big thanks to all of you from the pastors and congregations of Andover, Anoka, and Ramsey. We are so pleased, and we rejoice in your passion, your love, and your commitment to the youth of our community. Please join me in our benediction. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for this beautiful spring morning, but even more, for the springtime promise of this gathering, the gift, the huge gift of coming together, and the holy equation of raising awareness, seeing the passion and the love that is here, and having that all equate to an incredible hope. So send us forth this morning, blessed with that hope, blessed with the generosity to share that hope for all the youth of our community. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful day.